Hello fellow gamers, Captain Sidaris here.
And 7 Saturn.
Joining us from the other side of the planet is Fury, the promotion counselor of Forged Alliance Forever, a community-driven Supreme Commander project.
G'day everyone.
Hi again and thank you for joining us. Could you tell us maybe a little bit about yourself? Who are you and how did you get into the Supreme Commander community?
So my tag is Fury. I've played Supreme Commander on and off over the years, but whilst I've been around since the start of the game, I've really only participated in the community for about 6 months. I'm actually a board member of the new Forged Alliance Forever Association and interim promotions counsellor, as you mentioned. So that's probably about it. I'm in Australia. I've had an IT background, and so a lot of my contributions have been in the IT space, but not development.
Okay, so not in the software development, so more in the promotion part, or in what area?
More in things like, we did some work on security certificates and security questions, stuff like that. I came to the promotions counsellor role when the last promotions counsellor resigned earlier in the month. And just to represent the board and basically to maintain continuity, I took on that role as in an interim fashion, just to keep the news flowing and represent the board as well on that level.
Well, I would say it's time to answer a question. What is Supreme Commander? In short, SuCom is a real-time strategy game on the epic end of the spectrum. In the game you take control of a giant armored command unit and build up your bases and armies. All three factions fight for the classic things any Supreme Commander likes. Control of the galaxies, for freedom, and the most classic thing, bringing peace to all by killing all. For that they all use unique units like the UAF with the giant moving tank factory, the Cybran with walking spiders or ships, and the Eons with their enormous flying saucers. Well, like I said, just an epic game. The game itself works fine on Windows 10, but to experience the amazing multiplayer community, you should get the Steam version. That way you can not only get more bug fixes, but also many maps, mods, and of course, the best part, a working co-op mod.
And which brings us to our guest here. As we heard, it's Forged Alliance Forever. So this is kind of a mod which expands on the normal Supreme Commander Forged Alliance. I mean, for all those of you who don't really know the game, Supreme Commander actually was a standalone game, and Supreme Commander Forged Alliance also is standalone, but builds up on the story, and I believe also adds a few units or buildings. And yeah, it's kind of a Supreme Commander 2, although the actual Supreme Commander 2 is a whole different game. So if you buy a Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, then it's a standalone game, but you can consider it an add-on.
It's worth mentioning that if you do want to play the game with Forged Alliance Forever, you only need Forged Alliance. You don't need to buy the base game, but you do need to buy it through Steam because we do a license check to make sure everyone owns the game that we're supporting. And with GOG, they didn't make that API publicly available to us, so that's why we're going with Steam.
Basically, the problem is on a technical basis, which is not provided by GOG, because this would be one of the questions: why not GOG?
Yes, so that is a common question. Why can't we play through GOG? And that's why they haven't made that available to us, so we can't.
A quick side note just here, if you own the original copy of the game, for example Supreme Commander or Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, it doesn't matter, you can use either key to unlock both titles on Steam, and that way you can also get Forged Alliance Forever, just to mention.
Yeah, I'll go over what Forged Alliance Forever is. Originally you had to play multiplayer through GPGnet, and at a certain point they shut down. And so Forged Alliance Forever was created to basically keep the multiplayer alive, and it's transformed into, we do balance changes for the game, we do AI changes for the game, we have the game client where we have mods and maps that you can download, and a whole community around that. And so people can contribute in all sorts of ways. We've got Java for the desktop client and the server API. There's an old Python client that's still supported unofficially from us that people keep going. We have the Lua code, which is basically the game's scripting language and how all the balance changes and a lot of the modding. When you get heavy into it, you can use Lua to do those changes. We have a wide variety of things, map makers, not just mod makers. There's popular mods that people make and support. We even have another faction made, Nomads mod. So that's another faction in the game that we have. And we also have the obvious one, the co-op, is one of the FAF supported mods. And it's worth noting that, we're always looking for new developers and people that want to contribute, especially on the game development end with Lua. That's where a lot of the demand is, and a lot of the outstanding tickets say on GitHub. That's a good place for someone to start who maybe is in university and they want to do some Lua scripting for a game. Then they can come join us and give us a hand.
There's the first question for me. I just lately learned that you can actually play the Steam version still online without any FAF. And question for me is, was that always the case? Because I always thought you cannot play the multiplayer of the base Forged Alliance Steam version. Did they change that lately, or was there a real need for this?
I think at the time you could only play through GPGNet, and so there was a need. Now they've modified it so that you can use the multiplayer tab in the game, the original one, and it's all Steam integrated and it just works. There's about probably, I think they have a third of the players that we have, and they don't have many active lobbies. So if you look at Forge Alliance Forever and open up the lobby, there is sometimes 20 or more games in the queue. We also have matchmaking, 1v1, 2v2, and soon 3v3 and 4v4, which is not, none of that is supported in the Steam client. The Steam client allows you to play, create a lobby and play with your friends, and that's it. Whereas with the Forged Alliance Forever client, as I said, matchmaking, you've got the custom games, you've also got the integrated chat so that you can chat to all the players playing Forged Alliance all over the world as well.
What I always found really cool actually about it was the map repository. When I used it the first time, it was a little bit overwhelming, but the number of features is cool that they added here. Not only kind of using the normal stuff, but also adding player slots. This is something that in the base game bugged me a little bit. You have up to 8 players in the original game, and last time I checked it was 16 players for Forged Alliance Forever, which is really cool because you can get really epic matches going. But from first glance, something that really struck me was, man, I can download a lot of maps here and I can see them right away. It's not get some files from a website and place it in a certain folder. You don't have to worry about that. And this is the thing that really struck me first, that I thought, damn, those guys could have done that in the original game. This is really cool.
Yeah, so the maps that are integrated, the mods as well are integrated. It's a simple matter of searching for them, clicking the one you want, installing it, and then it just works. And you can play right away, and there's no stuffing around in the background, there's no messing with folders or configs. You just click install and you are done, and that's really impressive. The other thing that the client also does is on the subject of the maps, there's a map generator, and you can actually generate maps as well now.
This is cool. This I didn't know. Gotta give this a shot. Because, after a while you know some maps and well, this works nice, but I have played this a million times, so that's cool. I gotta check that out.
So that is impressive, and you can tweak the settings a little bit and get those things generated. Another thing that we do, we have the replay vault, so you can actually look up yourself if you say, we're on another computer or you lost your thing, and you can see all your old replays, and you can see other people's replays. So if you want to see Tagada, for example, he's ranked 2500 or so. If you want to see some of his games, you can just search his name. You can search by all sorts of properties, maps, etc., 1v1 or just team games, whatever you like. You can search, and then you can actually watch those replays as well.
Something else I heard, I'm not quite sure if this is kind of true. If I remember correctly, there was also a mod that tries to replicate the original Total Annihilation factions core in ARM. Do you know something about that one too?
I don't know anything about that one.
Because this is really something that strikes you if you know Total Annihilation and you play Supreme Commander for the first time. Then you think, well, that's really a better version of TA. I bet a lot of TA guys would stone me now when I say Supreme Commander is better than TA, but to me it is.
Interestingly, brings up a good point. Some people have actually forked the Forged Alliance Forever project, and they've created Total Annihilation Forever, and they are actually running off our code base with their modifications so that they can actually do the same thing for their game, and they have a Discord set up and everything as well. So if people are actually interested in Total Annihilation, they can play on a similar client and do similar things for that game as well, which is pretty cool. Do you guys know about the history of Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander and their relationship?
Yeah,
Kind of, yeah.
and I will come to it a little bit later.
Okay, cool.
A more general question for me would be, how and when did the project start?
I can only give limited insight on that far back. As I said, my involvement as a contributor is probably only 6 months old. My involvement as a player has been on and off for a number of years. I was late to the game. When I first played the game, I actually didn't like it, and we can get into that soon. It was only later where I tried again and appreciated it. So in terms of when the project started, FAF was as early as 2011, maybe even earlier than that, and it transferred ownership from Zapilot in about 2014 to a lot of the current players that are involved now, until it eventually became an association in March of this year.
You told me that the association was done in Denmark. Why Denmark? It's a strange place, even if it's in the middle of Europe.
So the reason why Denmark was chosen was because they allow the official language of the association and all the official documents to be in English, and they're also in the EU, and so that was considered important, so they chose Denmark. So it's in the EU, all the documentation is English, and that was essentially why. It also allows for a reasonable amount of anonymity for the board members and so on.
Well, I'm more a tech guy, so to say. What I'm wondering is who's running the technical infrastructure for you guys. I mean, you have a client which obviously tries to communicate or does communicate with other clients, and this implies there's some sort of server running, and that alone, I mean, is work to be done to maintain this. Who's doing that for you?
So we have a large team. We've got people working on some things like balance. We have people working on games and promotions, maps and mods. But in terms of the server, we have former DevOps counselor is still managing that, and that's Brutus 5000. And he deals with a lot of the development for the Java API. So when you open the client, you connect to the Java API, and that's where the replays and the games list is pulled from, and all the player statistics and so on and so forth are pulled from. So that's done in Java, and we host all of that in Germany. And we have all sorts of assets. We have the web page, we've got the news, we have the API there. So all of that is managed by a group of people.
You also said FAF is not just simply technical stuff, but also kind of a mod. This is something I also noticed when I played it the first time. Such things that I also was missing, like a Tech 3 anti-air mobile unit for the UEF. Was this always part of the idea, or did this evolve later that you thought, well, maybe we can improve balancing, add some units, stuff like that?
So in terms of the source of the idea, I think they were always focused on fixing bugs, and you could call balance in a way, it could be a bug if it's at least a flaw. So it's always seemed, if you look at the old forums, there's always people working on those sort of balance issues from the start. So that is a core part of the project, to fix balance and make the game competitive. There's also user interface fixes for the shields. You can actually queue up shield upgrades where you couldn't in the base game, and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or the upgrades for the metal extractors or the repair buildings. It's a lot of small stuff, but it's a cool stuff. Things that you can really feel that guys who played the game and were bugged by certain problems were thinking, man, how can we do this better? So in a way, this is actually what I would have expected from Supreme Commander Forged Alliance in the first place. If you know Supreme Commander and Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, I believe the most intense difference is that Forged Alliance is a little bit faster economy-wise, but aside from that, in my opinion, they don't differ that much. And what the guys of FAF, in my opinion, did is they really improved upon the game experience, and this is something that FAF could have done in the first place. So, in a way, are doing their job.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's a learning experience for the developers as well. Obviously, they created Total Annihilation and then moved on to do this game, and this game has evolved, and Forged Alliance evolved again. So I guess at the same time, there's only so much dev time that they have, and sometimes you have to play games. If you look at major games from major corporations, if we branch out to something like Civ 6, they have balance changes when the game first come out. They have balance changes constantly. When the expansions come out, they have balance changes as well. And so sometimes these things just happen. We're actually very fortunate with Forged Alliance. Chris Taylor, who's the lead designer for it, he actually, because he was making, he's if anyone watching this is interested in game development, they should really watch a lot of the Chris Taylor videos, because he goes into detail on not only the corporate structure that he had to deal with, the contracts, he'll talk about the actual development, he'll talk about all those sort of things. So he's definitely worth watching, and he goes into the history of stuff. And he made a I believe it was a baseball game, and part of the problem with that was you couldn't use the official team, so he made it moddable so that you could fill in the team data yourself and then play with the official teams, even though they couldn't ship the game with it. And so when he created these games, he had that in mind and made them moddable. And because he's used Lua,
this is something I also find important. Fun fact is he also had this mindset when he created TA.
Yes.
This is really something that nowadays I believe is a little bit rare, that guys really take the opportunity to make a game moddable and really emphasize on it. We have talked about this on our channel a million times. Mods are keeping communities alive, or at least they help doing that. And from that point of view, this guy really has understood something. I really like him for that, and in general, he's really open talking about stuff like that. So, yeah, Chris Taylor is always a good idea to check out. If someone does a video with him, go for it.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely fantastic commentary, and you can learn so much about various things, and he'll talk about those. And he's very honest where he can be, where he's not bound by a contract or something, but that is fantastic stuff. And so we are very fortunate that, for example, a lot of the game code is done in a Lua scripting language because it's available to us, whereas the source code for the game is not available to us. It's owned by Square Enix, so we can't make any changes to the engine. This does mean that there's some bugs that we cannot fix and never can fix, but because the scripting is available, we can make those balance changes, we can add units, we can change the user interface, we can do all that sort of stuff. So we are fortunate.
A quick sidestep here. Is Lua a common scripting language, or programming language, or is it a very unique one? Maybe Saturn, you know something about that?
Really common.
Yeah, it's quite common to be used with like C++ games and programs and stuff like that, and you can even have it compiled to an extent as well. So it's used in games because it's quite fast. But that's one of the areas, as I mentioned before, it's in high demand. So if anyone knows Lua, wants to know Lua, and they want to contribute to the community, that's a good place.
About the future of the project, can you maybe give us some hints where it's leading you?
Well, as I was saying earlier, in March we registered the association, and there was a couple of reasons for doing that. There was a personal tax liability on an individual that's now gone, so we can now raise money without it impacting the taxes of an individual. So that means the more money we have, the more possibilities we have, and we'll also be transferring the IP for Forged Alliance Forever into the association, so it's not bound to one person. There's less questions about what does this mean, where is it going, and it sort of gives it a more certain future. The focus at the moment is on building a budget and deciding where we can spend some of that money. And I can't elaborate too much, but that's where some of the focus is now, because it is the early stages for the association.
Well, as someone who is, I don't know the English expression actually, board member, chairman in an association myself, I know that there is certain administrative work to be done, stuff like that. And how do the people feel about this strain on their time? I mean, is it a lot of work? If you're talking about giving someone the ownership of stuff or like that, then there's always some legal aspect about it that you have to know. So how is it going technically with the law stuff, so to say? Is this a lot of work for you?
So I'm a board member, and I'm also the interim promotions counsellor, and each of these things have different time requirements. And before I was doing that, I was volunteering a little bit on some tech support, and then I did some security stuff for the web page. And it's really how much time you're willing to give it. Some people give a lot more. We say that if you want to have one of the counsellor roles, about 4 hours a week you should be expected to give up to be able to do that job. And that can vary from week to week depending on the role, on how much it is. But the 4 hours is about a rough expectation, and it really is, we consider real life to be the most important thing. That's why we sort of cap it out at about 4 hours. If you need more than that and you can't do it, we'll get more contributors to help out, because it shouldn't be your whole life. From my experience, one of the things we've done on the board is we made a way to have little votes before having so many board meetings, just so that we could discuss items and then maybe vote on them without having to call everyone in for a board meeting. Because, for example, for me, it's 6 a.m. on a Monday morning for me to do the board meetings, the last one, and others have other requirements. Some of them needed to take some time off work or adjust their work schedule. So we've done those sort of things to reduce the impact on individuals.
And how do you go about this technically? Are you doing a video web session, or because I'm asking because I know of association which did their annual council meetings, the one that is mandatory, in a web forum. Was, I believe, only one or two which in Germany did this, but they were allowed to do this, and I found it a really interesting approach to say, well, it goes out for 2 days on a weekend, and votes and stuff like that are always cast in a web forum. How do you do this, considering you're a kind of spread over the entire world?
With our original meeting, we ran a Discord meeting. We gave about a month's notice, and then we ran this meeting. We took votes and counted those votes. And for the board meetings, we run a Discord meeting because there's much fewer people there. It's very easy to count those votes. We're already thinking about what we might do with the next annual General Assembly. We might use one of the Discord stages.
Yeah.
The Discord stage allows you to, mute everyone and then have people put their hand up and so on. But we will work out how we do that. We just need to be able to work out how many there are, what's the majority number for the voting, and go from there.
So you really have to be present time-wise. I can imagine how this is putting a strain on you.
Yeah, so that's the most important part, is if you're going to be a member of the board, you need to be available for board meetings. At the moment, we've only had 2, and we'll have some more before the next general meeting. But if anyone wants to be a member of the association, it really is expected that they do show up to that annual meeting to put their hand up and say, yes, I want to be involved, because part of being involved is that you vote on who's going to be the president of the association and who are the board members. So it is important that people come along to that. And I think
if you have to take an interest in what is going on.
And I think if you do enjoy the game, you enjoy the community, I think it is important for people to take that time and do it. It is once a year, and it'll go for 2-3 hours. It's worth contributing, I think, and having your voice heard. Otherwise, if you are unhappy with the president and how it's going, well, you could have had your input. So I encourage people to join and come along.
Is this precedented, or are there any other associations focused around a specific computer game?
So it's really no different to your local sports club. It's an association. They have a president, they have a treasurer, they have some board members, and it depends how big they get. If they get to be quite large, a lot of these non-profits might even employ someone to manage the association. In our particular case, we're all volunteers. We don't have enough money to employ anyone. The money that we have is, going to be used on little projects here and there, maybe some tournaments. It really depends on, the people that contribute, how they want their money spent. A lot of people that contribute do not want their money spent on tournaments, and some only want their money spent on tournaments. So it really isn't different to like a computer club or a sports association in that way. It's very much the same. It's mainstream.
But do you know of one that really focuses on a computer game? As you said, sports clubs and stuff like that. I mean, basically, most football clubs in Germany are also some sort of association, at least on the lower levels. So this I know, but are there any ones which do a similar thing about computer games in special?
I don't know of any that operate this way.
Because I've never heard of this, and it wouldn't surprise me if you were the first doing it about a computer game.
And it is possible. I think it is ultimately a good thing. This is hopefully going to stay around for a long time. It's a good game. It continues to be a good game. And I think it makes it a bit more resilient to individuals coming and going, and a bit more professional.
Yeah, I also think it's a good sign also for the health of the community and, of course, of the size. There are a lot of old games which have a few hundreds on a Discord or maybe a big forum, but you guys are, I think, on 80,000 members on the Discord alone. Amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And I think in terms of active players, it's over 3,000 a month active.
Active is something completely different, that's sure, but going to the point where you make an association is alone I can't describe it other than amazing.
It's a commitment, definitely, but it also shows how sincere the guys are. This is, I believe, what's the most important aspect about it. There are guys out there which are willing to invest not only into mods or maps or stuff like that. This is very common in many games, but which are really also serious about the real life aspects of the game, of the community. This, I believe, is the most unique part, that you say, well, this computer game is so important for me that I invest my time into administrative stuff, and especially all over the world. It would be a completely different thing if you have some friends and you play this game a lot and you do a local association in your hometown or something like that. But this is a new scale of investment, so to say, of players.
Yeah, it is, and it is really surprising on one hand, but it's really fantastic. We also have, we've got people in Russia that play the game, all over the world. So and they contribute from all over the world as well. So yeah, it is very impressive.
It's also a tribute to the game itself. I mean, personally, for me, this is one of the, so to say, the better games. There are a lot of which are okayish, and some are really amazing, and this is pretty up in the ranks. A pretty amazing game, I believe, for me that is. And it shows that there are a lot of people out there who feel in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and I assume we'll get to the pros and cons of the game later, because I've got a lot to say just about what you're talking about there, but I'll wait until we get to that.
Before that, I would say let's go quickly to the history of the game. We already talked a few things about this subject, but quickly recap everything. After the success of Total Annihilation, Chris Taylor left the original studio, Cave Dogs, behind, founded Gas Power Games, and basically, which led him to the path of making Supreme Commander. They started first with Dungeon Siege, but switched to Supreme Commander in 2003, finished the game 4 years later, and sadly they didn't have the rights for Total Annihilation, so they decided, well, what can we do? Let's make a spiritual successor. From the beginning on, it was also clear they wanted, as Saturn mentioned, they wanted to make it bigger and better, not only in scale, but also by pushing the limits in general, which is a rare thing nowadays, that a developer studio say, let's push it, let's make the best thing we can do.
I mean, it depends. If you think about game engines, completely different story. They really try to push the boundaries, but most, I believe, development studios don't have the resources to really push the limits with their own game, unless they have their own engine, of course.
Yeah, because they have to spend all the time to make the loot boxes and everything.
Yeah.
For the scale, Chris Taylor wanted also that the entire theater of war is a real living thing the player can feel, which they also managed quite nicely with the amazing strategic zoom, I would say.
Yeah, that was one of the most important features of the game, I would say, the strategic zoom, where you can zoom into any spot on the map or view the whole screen, the whole map in one go.
It's
And it
kind
has,
of surprising for new players. That one of the at least from what I've experienced, the most common question is, where is the minimap? Well, there is no minimap. You don't need any minimap. Just use your scroll wheel and scroll out, and you have, so to say, a minimap. And the approach was ingenious.
You can still use one as well, though. I use the minimap in the game a bit, but I find that it's easier to scroll out than it is to even pay attention to it, because of just how much is going on and how quickly you can just scroll the wheel and you're at the whole view. You can see everything.
And on that specific aspect, maybe a cool idea, have multi-screen support.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to mention that they should have written in the manual, if you want a minimap, buy a second monitor.
Yeah, that is one of the unique features of the game. I hadn't seen, especially from 2007, I haven't seen too many games that have that multi-monitor support. So you can actually turn on your second monitor and zoom into a part of the screen, or do whatever you want with that second screen and play the game, which is quite unique to be able to zoom in on an RTS to some other location on a second screen. I don't think too many do that.
And that's pretty much what shows that the developers or the game design team was thinking, let's improve on what we already have. It's not just another game with a map and there are units running around and they shoot each other, normal stuff like that, but they really added functionalities which are unheard of or rarely used back then, and it shows that they were trying to improve the general situation, not just a new game with new units really improve RTS in general.
Even today, I would say if you play some of these modern games, they're not quite at the same level. And so that just really goes to show the amount of foresight Chris Taylor and all the people involved in the development had at the time.
Definitely.
One other very important thing you already mentioned for Chris Taylor was that the modding aspect, that it was there, that the community had the possibility to come up with new ideas, make some crazy stuff, just have fun with the game. And of course, do stuff which are basically not allowed. For example, he mentioned in modding, it's often possible for the fans to make, for example, Star Wars content in a non-Star Wars game. So you have the freedom to do whatever you like.
Absolutely. The limit is on the amount of time that you have to put into those things and your skills in those areas. If you wanted to do that, you could, if for example, someone could make Star Wars units, for example, in the game. There's nothing stopping people from doing that. That's up to you. If you want to do that, by all means, learn to make those models and do that. And that is one of the most important parts of this community is. Without that modding ability, this project would look nothing like it does now. It would simply be like a multiplayer lobby rather than the all-encompassing thing that it is.
You already mentioned also that the game, of course, got an expansion pack in November of 2007. And you mentioned also a lot of those stuff, like they added campaigns, factions, optimized the interface gameplay. All the other factions got, of course, additional units. And the most important part you didn't mention, it was a standalone title. You can just buy it and play it, which could also count as a unique thing. There are a few titles out there which made this possible. It's so rare.
Well, fun fact, I got Supreme Commander Forged Alliance first. So I didn't have any idea about the background story and stuff like that. And maybe this already counts as one of the unique memories. When you play the game first time in your life and you think, well, they are throwing me in pretty heavily. I got almost all units at my disposal. Obviously, there's some story going on, and you're in the middle of all this, and all of a sudden you can build your really big units from start, so to say. No, this build-up kind of thing in many RTS games where you build up the story, you unlock units for the player. And I was playing FA the first time, not playing Supreme Commander, and you're thrown into this real big bag of units and possibilities, and this was really cool for me. Later on, I discovered, well, Forged Alliance was not the first title. There's, so to say, a prequel, and I played this too, and it's just a cool game, but Forged Alliance puts it a little bit higher in many aspects.
Yeah, and we're touching now on the economic model when you talk about all of the games, units being available from the start. We're really getting into the pros and cons in a minute. So when are we ready to talk about those, or?
Just two sad history facts. In 2008, shortly after the release of the expansion, GPG ended the official support of the game. And amazingly, it took 4 years to shut down all the multiplayer servers. And yeah, you could have thought that's the end of the multiplayer, but no, you guys stepped up and created the amazing new place.
Yeah, and we're very lucky for that. Now, as you said earlier, you can play some multiplayer lobbies through Steam, but until that change was made, which is a more modern change, I can't give you the exact time it happened, but that's more of a modern thing. Until that happened, there wasn't a way without FAF to do so. And even now, FAF is still the superior way to do that because you get all those extra features.
I was just happy to see that it works, because on a not so nice side, so to say, if you have to install an additional client or stuff like that, it's always a little barrier for someone. If you say, well, guys, let's play Supreme Commander, and then you say, but first you will have to install FAF and you have to tie your Steam account with it, and yada yada yada. It's a lot easier to show them how the multiplayer works if you can play it natively via the Steam client. And this is why I was so happy to find out, well, you can actually play the game without FAF. Not that FAF is doing a bad job or something like that, but actually you don't need it to play online with your friends. This is, for me, still an important aspect. There are games out there where you cannot do this easily, where you need a VPN or stuff like that. And in this case, you'd simply drop in, create a lobby, and your friends can join. Still important today.
Yeah. And you see a bit of a shift in the industry. Sometimes they don't allow you to run your own servers. You must use the online servers, for example. And then when the game closes them down, without modifying the game, you're in trouble.
Exactly.
The last thing I would like to mention about the history is also a question to you. They released an Xbox version of the game. Did you ever play it?
I've never played the Xbox version. I think that was for Supreme Commander 2, wasn't it?
No, in 2008 they released a dumbed down version of Supreme Commander for the Xbox 360.
Yeah, I wasn't aware they did one for this one. I thought that was for the second one, which is part of the reason why it was scaled down.
That's also true, yeah.
Yeah, which...
Well, for lack of any Xbox, never did. And quite frankly, I'm not really inclined to try to.
Yeah, it's one of those things they did have to dumb it down a little bit for that. And that's why you see, so obviously we're talking about Supreme Commander here, but Supreme Commander 2 was scaled down a lot so that it could come out on the Xbox and be the same, which is, where it draws a lot of criticism as well.
Well, I can quite imagine that was a big hit for the community to play a dumbed down version.
Yeah, especially if you're used to, well, RTS. RTS by itself usually is a little bit complex. Not in a you won't understand it fashion, but, well, not dumbed down,
Especially if you're used to a mouse.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I mean. If someone were asking me, want to play Supreme Commander on a Xbox, which is, so to say, limited, I'd say, well, thank you, no thank you. Because I know how good Supreme Commander feels right now before a computer and playing the game and
It does require
matching the
you
experience.
it does require you to make quite a number of actions per minute that just wouldn't be possible from a controller.
Yeah.
Moving back to the PC version, what are the pros for you guys? What are the best parts of this game?
So one of the things that sets it apart from the other games at the time, and it's still in some ways unique today, is the economic model, where you produce an income and you don't buy a unit, you start spending money whilst you build it, and you spend that money during the course of its build, which makes it it's just a much nicer way to play. But it does come with the cons of you will get yourself into situations where you suddenly find your economy overwhelmed and you have a lot of things going on and you won't know why that's happening. So it does mean that you do have to pay attention to what you're doing and what you might be doing in a few minutes to be able to work that out. For example, a shield would then cost energy to turn it on, and so you'll start building a shield, a couple minutes later you'll have that shield, and then that will be taken from your economy. And so that kind of balance with the economy is very interesting, and it's not something that was available in many other games or any other games that I know of at the time. And it's still, if you look at Command & Conquer and Age of Empires, that's not how they work.
It's inherited from Total Annihilation. I believe they don't have shields, at least not in the base game. Some mods do. But the concept was plain and simple TA. They did this back then too. If you have, for example, the big fat Vulcan gun and you're firing on your enemy and you simply lack the energy, then all of your stuff will turn off, like your metal creators, your radar. And the idea is not new, but they implemented it rather well and added new aspects to it. Yeah, they improved the idea. This way, you can clearly see where the game actually is coming from or where it is inheriting from. And as you said, there are not too many games which work like that. I mean, Ashes of the Singularity, for example, does today. But the concept isn't too new, so to say. It's actually rather old, considering how old TA is.
Yeah, and when I was sort of speaking about it, I considered it the same thing. TA is just an earlier version, really, of Supreme Commander. If you look at it, it was similar people making it, similar goals. The technology changed so that we were able to do more with Supreme Commander, but it's a very similar game. So when I talk about the model, I'm almost referring to both of them at the same time. It's one of those things where it's also a con for the game, in the sense that if you're a new player, it can be quite confusing to know what's happening in your economy. And what's happening in the game and why you can't build something because of that economic management. It does take it's a bit of a barrier to entry, but without it, the game simply wouldn't have the staying power that it does now. We wouldn't be playing this game if it didn't have this feature. This is what makes the game.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I had a similar discussion with a colleague of mine a few days ago, and when we were playing the Supreme Commander Forge Alliance online. This was when I found out it has still multiplayer support via Steam or again. And this is also something he mentioned. He was playing it with a few friends of him, and they started the match. And after a while, as you said, the economy got overwhelmed. If you have no idea what you're doing there, this kind of gets in the way. And this is actually why they weren't too fond of the game, because they were not prepared for what this game has in store and what requirements it has to a player. But once you have gotten the hang of it, it's a completely different story. But you will have to, so to say, get into the spirit of the game to accept this fact and to cope with the situation. And yeah, you're right. It could be also a barrier.
I guess most players are not used to it because most games don't have that feature.
Yeah, for
Certainly.
example, if you look at StarCraft, they don't have this energy in the sense of it runs your factories. You have more like a mana-like energy, so a unit can cast something and this costs energy. But you will never have the situation that when you build, for example, too many in your factories, then your shields are dropping or stuff like that. It's a little bit more in-depth, and the scale changes, of course. Your economy all of a sudden is important, really is important, not just production-wise, but also infrastructure-wise. And yeah, I believe that this also points into the one really interesting aspect, the scale. We already talked a little bit of it, scratched it a little bit, but what you can clearly see from the game is it's meant to improve on scale. I mean, 40 kilometers maps playing, and you can see how tiny your units actually are, considering how far the map reaches. And the sheer amount of units you can build. We had a similar discussion with Ashes of the Singularity. You can literally have hundreds of units running around each faction, and many RTS don't allow you for the mere number and the implied strategic and tactical aspects.
What also many RTS don't do is the simulation of the weapons. For example, every shot in this game is simulated. If there is a mountain in the path of the gunshot, well, you won't hit. In CNC, it doesn't matter. Your tank will always hit the other unit.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's on a mountain or in a village, which is for me one of the best parts even. That you really have to think where you plant your defense structures or from which side you attack, that you should move your ships after you fired your artilleries.
Yeah,
and
the topology is important. This was already present in TA, but again in this title, as you say, you can have this kind of annoying situation where you place your defense tower somewhere, and the damn thing cannot hit any units because it's a little bit too behind of the ramp of your choke point, and it simply fires into the ground. You gotta know what your units are doing and where to place them properly.
Or another example, all the planes in most RTS fly on a fixed level of altitude. Here, if the planes are a little bit higher, for example, they start from a mountain down to the village, the bombers can hit even other aircrafts in the air because it's simulated. The bomb will hit what it hits, so if there is a plane in the way, bad luck for the plane.
And it's on that subject of where things are. Like there's some things like with the missile defense structures. If they're too close together, sometimes they lose effectivity because, they're trying to shoot down the same missile. And then, of course, the missile that they shoot down, another one will come through and potentially break those things as well. Another thing is the game, every unit has a counter, but the game does favor offense. If you try and lock down and basically turtle, you'll usually be punished for that. Unless the map is so large where you have no choice but to build your base, you'll be punished for trying to turtle. It does favor those who expand and those that are doing offensive maneuvers.
Yeah, because you also have to grow your empire, basically. Your metal extractors have to be, they have to grow. Everything has to grow to sustain the economy and more units.
And how you are managing this is also a different aspect. I mean, if you have played TA, they already had the so to say standard features like queuing build commands for a build unit, stuff like that. But Supreme Commander really tries to even improve this game experience. For example, you have this line build, where you hold shift and drag a building, yeah, and then it doesn't just move around the mouse cursor and place it where you left off, but it draws a line where all units between those two lines are repeated. You have a line of, for example, wall bricks, or you can place, if you want to, multiple turrets, defense turrets at once, all next to each other. You can draw a line where they are being built, and this way you can actually manage the scale of your economy. For example, in the early game, when you are doing multiple Tech 1 generators, you just draw a line of 4 of them instead of clicking 4 times, placing a single generator. And they really were thinking about improving game mechanics wise. Or another really awesome feature, in my opinion, is the bridge feature. You can have dropships in this game, which transport your units, and you can order a unit to kind of act like a bridge. You have a starting point and an end point, and every time you send units to the starting point, the dropship automatically picks up those units, transports them to the target. This isn't even the end of it. You can even order a factory to set a rally point for this very specific endpoint. So your factory is producing units, sending them to the rally point, and from this rally point they are being picked up by the dropship, sent somewhere else. And features like that really are amazing. There are many games today which still haven't this kind of complexity or convenience in this case. It's more an aspect of convenience, and there are many games which still lack this.
You can even add transports to that thing so that you have multiple transports working on the same path.
Yeah, and this is simply cool. You don't have the game emphasizes more on economy and managing your units than micromanagement. I mean, you can micromanage in this game to a certain degree, but it is not as important. It's more about what is your strategy than your tactics.
I think this is also the real upgrade to the game from Total Annihilation. It's not the bigger maps, more guns, more units, whatever. It's the better interface, the queuing up of orders, the waypoint system. Everything is so nicely done, so intuitive. Really good job there.
Or stuff like moving a point. In many games you can simply queue up commands. But once you have ordered those commands, you have given those commands, then, well, that's it. And you can say, well, I don't want this building to be placed here anymore. I can move the building, the designated building spot to another position as long as the building process hasn't begun, or the move command. That's just cool.
And how many times in an RTS the constructor will not start the process because a stupid unit is in the way?
Yeah, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you have to break this queue, you will have to re-queue it all over again. And in this case, you can simply drag the building point or the move point somewhere else, and stuff still continues. It's those small things that turn out to be really big, actually.
Yeah, and certainly if you are creating a long build queue and you misplace something by accident, you don't have to start again. As you say, you just hold down shift and then you can move that one piece back to where it needs to go without having to restart the whole build, which is very, very good as well. And you can even cancel a few items in the build order as well.
Yeah, just the other day I was thinking the only way you can really improve on this would be to be able to rearrange the order of build queues or insert certain build orders or move orders in between. This is the one thing that I'm missing, that sometimes you have, let's say, a building being destroyed by your enemy and you need a new building, but you will have to either use a new build queue or a different constructor, because you cannot say, well, let's squeeze in a new shield generator in here between the two let's say energy generators or something like that. This is the one thing that I'm missing, but aside from that, it's almost perfect.
Yeah, priority order would be nice.
The game is moddable, so it's always something that someone could look at as well. There's a lot of people who have made economic stats mods and stuff like that, and modifications to how things work. So that would probably be possible.
Don't give me hopes. No, essentially, this is what really is so cool about the game. They were thinking a lot about managing the game. If you take StarCraft, for example, this is more about, so to say, static management. Right now I'm pressing this key, or I have my build queue here in this building construction building, and that's pretty much the end of it. And a dynamic aspect to it, or managing big amounts of units, stuff like that, they really improved on that. If you know TA and you play Supreme Commander for the first time, then you think, guys, this is exactly what I needed. This is what I wanted. They really improved, and this also isn't just a technical aspect like better graphics or stuff like that, but the gameplay itself really improved a lot. And I think this is part of what makes the game so popular.
Well, maybe the developers, they played the game and thought, would it be nice to change the move order or the queue order?
Yeah.
We often talk about this. Why don't the developers play the fucking game or start the fucking software?
Yeah, or as I describe it, where was the tester? Why didn't this come up during testing?
One of the things that hopefully people watching this maybe pick up some Chris Taylor YouTube videos, but a lot of the things that he mentioned early on in the development was that he was allowed the creative freedom to work on these things. So if he wasn't enabled to actually build the game that he wanted, they would simply not exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a variation of the eat your own dog food idea. Just try it out yourself, see what are the quirks, see how can you improve your experience with the game. I believe all game designers and software developers know this mechanic, so to say, that you use your stuff and you think, this bugs me, I gotta change this. And if you are not allowed to do this because, well, the super feature XY is very important, do your work time on that, while you think it's a minor aspect, no one cares actually. But you know from experience what you have found could be a problem, and you are not allowed changing this. This could really be frustrating, and in some games you can really see that this happened. If you talk to the developers about it, they are not too happy about it either, but they were not allowed to improve it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. If you are allowed a fairly limitless amount of creative freedom within reason, you'll be more passionate as well, and that's, you can see the passion of the developers in the game.
Yeah, it really helps the game to become a great game. I mean, there are a lot of games out there which are shiny and nice, but they don't give you this special kind of feeling that someone really put their love into it. And in Supreme Commander, you don't have this feeling. You really feel, well, those guys did a nice job. They must be fond of the product they released.
Another thing I really like, even though it's complex, it's still kind of intuitive. You still know basically this picture looks like a tank, this must be a tank, or that you don't lose the overview of the whole thing. Of course, in the big battles it's complicated sometimes, but you still have the feeling you're in control.
Especially, as you mentioned, the looks themselves. I mean, you know what models represent what, how an artillery will most likely look like, stuff like that. But I find the looks in general are still nice. I mean, the game is more than a decade old now, and still it looks rather decent. I mean, it could use a facelift in terms of texture resolutions and maybe some more polygons. But in general, if you look at the artwork and how it was exercised, it still looks really good, actually.
Yeah, I think it is quite impressive, and it holds itself quite well. There's not that you don't look at it and think, oh man, this is really old. It may very well, have things that are more basic, but it doesn't feel that old.
Exactly. I mean, if you compare it with this art style that is implemented today, the more comic style look, looking more like comic draw style, which is really common today. This is one way to go about it. Yeah, kind of making the surfaces a little bit more dull and a little bit more like a sketch or something. And they didn't do it, but in a similar fashion, the game still looks well. I couldn't really describe it really well, but if you look at the surface of a tank, then of course you will notice resolution of the textures could be a little bit better, but it still looks kind of timelessly okay. You probably can take a look at it in 10 years and think, well, still looks okay, even after more than 20 years.
I would say often the graphic isn't the aspect which tells you this game is old. Often it's the interface. Here you have a nearly perfect interface. For example, what we complained about Ashes of the Singularity. The game tells you how long certain actions will take or how much resources per second the unit will use on the economy.
It's training. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's, of course, the ideas themselves that are great. I mean, the new super units, you already said the Fat Boy, you know, the mobile factory. The idea itself is simply cool. You have a deployable factory, which also really packs a really hard punch. If you are not prepared for this unit, and it all of a sudden approaches your base, then good luck, guy. I mean, it's not a real game and in the sense of certain aspects of the game, but it really is hard. And if you go back to T8, they also had those, so to say, super units, and they took the idea to a new level. As you said, there's a flying saucer, you know, the flying fortress, which actually can produce aircraft. Similarly to the Fat Boy on the ground, the flying saucer, which produces and homes aircraft, or the Monkey Lord, I believe, the spider with a giant laser cannon on top, and those are units, you know. But there are also other super buildings, so to say. I mean, the really nuts idea of the infinity resource generator of the Eon. I don't know the name right now, but you
Paragon.
basically have infinite income once you complete this building. It's hilarious, you know. If you have the economy and the build power, then your opponent will really be fucked, you know. There's nothing stopping you except your build power, your management of the economy. Once you reach this level of development, so to say, or the Eye of Rian of the Eon, you know, you can just look at a certain map spot right on. I mean, you have similar mechanics, for example, in StarCraft. The scanning of the Terrans does a very similar thing. And,
The game is very dynamic in that respect. So you can there are those game enders that you're talking about, but even when you're switching to, say, Tech 2 or Tech 3, it's often cheaper to build the Tech 2 units. So then there's that balance to think about. And if you do start to overcome someone, they can then invest into those other experimentals, for example, to counter that. So the game, from start to finish, when you're battling in Tech 1 will be one type of game, and then you'll just shift a little bit as you go to Tech 2 and 3 as to what type of battle you're fighting, and it'll go back and forth as you do that. And then the Tech 4 units, the experimental units, will start coming out, and that again will just change a little bit about what's going on in the battlefield. So it's so dynamic in that sense. If the game goes on, it changes as you play.
And especially if you look at the mechanics, that you can not always say it's better to have the higher tech unit. I mean, a Tech 2 unit is, if you look at the resource expenditure and the gain from this unit, you will think, well, the Tech 2 unit is a no-brainer, you know? It over proportionally powerful. But when you go to level 3 again, your Tech 1 units might get important once again, because you have a big honky level 3 unit which is being killed like with ants, you know. There are a lot of small units and they put it down just because the firing rate of this Tech 3 unit isn't as high. One shot really packs a punch, but there are a whole lot of small units, and all of a sudden your Tech 1 units are of importance once again.
And that touches on another thing that I was going to say for the unique features, but Intel is one of the important things in this game. For example, if you know what your enemy is building, then you can build the counter to that, and then they can be totally overwhelmed with equal economy. So things like radar, you've got scouting, and you've got combat scouts or scouts as well that can do all this, and that's one of the reasonably unique features in the game. So, you know, your artillery, for example, it can shoot further than it can see, but it will need a supporting radar to do that, or a scout in that area. And I think that's one of the best things in the game. If you do not use Intel and Scout, it is crippling for you, because, you know, if I can see that you're focusing on air, well, I'm going to build some mobile AA units. If I can see you don't have an air factory, I'm going to invest everything in tanks. If you're on the other opposing team and you don't know that and you're just guessing, so you're like, oh, maybe he's got a couple of air units coming, I'll build some mobile AA units. Well, every mobile AA unit you've built is a tank that I have, and so you'll be overwhelmed. So Intel is one of those critical parts of the game that I think, you know, make it what it is.
And then again, it's not just a dynamic game on the battlefield itself. I mean, you talked about the artillery. And yeah, you can be really smashed by an artillery which is basically firing on the entire map. So he has it back somewhere in his base, really kicking your pants just by having a few units around scouting. So you don't necessarily have hundreds of units going around. You can also say, well, let's invest in a more distant kind of warfare. You have options. You don't have to go into brawling-like battles necessarily. You can keep the opponent from, for example, gaining new metal resources. So more of a harassment-like gameplay. But then again, it's not like a StarCraft 6 pool harassment where you simply take a few small units, run around, and destroy the economy, because the map itself simply is too vast to do it. To deploy a unit, a lot of small units fast to another side of the map. So you really have to think in advance. What part of the map do I want to take over, and how am I defending it on a long run? Because, well, if the other guy begins bombarding you with attack tree artillery, well, you're gonna have a hard time defending your newly found metal spots, for example.
One of the things players do as well at the start of a game is they'll build 1 or 2 tanks or a few light assault bots, and they'll send those out to mass points to harass engineers. Just getting that quick win against your engineers and slowing your economy down by that little bit so that they can get the edge. And it also takes the other player's mind off the game. They will be, instead of worrying about purely focusing on their economy and getting their tanks out, they'll then have to think, oh no, I've got to send some units over here, and I've got to hold the fort here and distract them that way.
And this really points also into the direction that the map itself is important, or especially the size. Because what you just described could easily be done in StarCraft as well. Take some Reapers and bug the hell out of someone's base economy. Of course you can do this, and the maps aren't too big to pull this off. You can early on bug your opponent, But in Supreme Commander, if you have a 40 by 40 kilometers map, well, once you reach the guy with your 2 tanks, you will probably have an army that will kick the pants off your 2 tanks. So it is not really feasible to use this kind of playstyle. You can do it on smaller maps, of course, but what I'm trying to say is even just the size of the map has an impact on how the match will progress.
Absolutely.
For me, one of the last things would be that it's not too clicky. You still have to think more about strategy than quick reaction or, well, this stress factor in StarCraft, for example.
It depends on, how much you want to micro it. You can micro it a lot if you need to. A lot of people micro things like their Tech 3 ASF fighters. They'll micro those a little bit. And you see even a bit of micro with Tech 1 tank games. If you're Aeon, you can move your tanks back and they have a little bit extra range, so you'll actually kill a few more of the enemy person's tanks if they pursue you. Then you'll lose. And so there is little micro things there. So I guess it's worth saying that the more you learn about the game, the more there is to learn, and there's so many things that you can learn to improve your game. So there's a lot of range in the amount of skill the player has.
I mean, there's always the classic, a mobile unit with limited firing range, like a bot, against a artillery tank. You can move around of the artillery because the firing rate is so low and it takes time until the shells reach the target. So your artillery might pack a punch, but if the guy knows how to micro, well, you lose them anyways. So the game has that in store. It is present there, but it is not as pronounced as in some other titles.
Exactly. It's not the key feature of the game.
But something that I really found funny was the upgrade to commanders. If you think back in Total Annihilation, once you have economy going, have a lot of construction workers and stuff like that, they will do most of the work, and your commanders actually mostly important for pushing certain build orders. But aside from that, the only thing you want to do is keep him away from the enemy so it doesn't get destroyed. But in Supreme Commander, you can upgrade your commanders and giving them new features, new abilities. And this I find a nice touch, because you can of course still use it as an economy booster. Add, for example, new tech layers which the command unit can produce, or for DUEF, for example, you have those building drones which increase the build power of the unit, or Donor Defection, I believe it's the Cybran that can teleport their commander, and it gives them new aspects. They aren't just production pushers, so to say. I find it a good idea.
It's worth mentioning as well, so the default mode of the game is the assassination mode, where you win by defeating the enemy's commander rather than their whole army. So you can actually have some surprise come behind victories when people might be losing, and they become quite inventive, and they might do some scouting. They'll see what you have, and then they'll make a play. I've had a bit of an embarrassing loss one time when I had my commander in a forward position. I had the superior number of troops, but my opponent built some missile launchers and fired all these missiles onto my commander in one hit
Yeah,
because I wasn't, paying attention. Bam, I'm out.
Or similar thing, if you have Tech 3 bombers, one or two of them might do the trick. If you're not careful and you don't have enough anti-air around, could be a quick lose. This is something, for example, the AI really likes to do, to harass you with their Tech 3 bombers, and you lose against an easy AI because you simply didn't factor in, well, he could come with bombers.
Yeah, but they've actually put enough bait in the game for you. Instead of you bunkering down your commander, there is enough bait there in the terms of the upgrades you can do and the power of the main gun on the commander that you will actually want to use your commander on the front line, especially in the first 10 minutes. And then, if you upgrade him, you may want to use him further. You can also then build some energy storage, and you can even use the overdrive capability to pack that extra punch with the main gun. So they do, they seem to have made a way where you don't actually want to bunker down your commander, you want to use him, because if you have an equal number of tanks and a commander, you're going to win. So, there's that kind of even to that level, there's that nuance in the.
You can
even
game. Make him more dangerous. I believe it's the Cybern which have this laser cannon upgrade for their commander, and then holy cow, this thing really will kick your butt.
Yep. And there's, the nano upgrades that can do, it restores HP faster and it gives it more HP. There's the main gun upgrades. There's, all sorts of things. And you did mention the teleporting stuff before as well, which can make for some interesting gameplay. I played a bit of 1v1 with a friend of mine, and he actually used his commander. He would put it on a transport ship, and he would use the upgrade for the tactical nukes, and he would launch the tactical nukes into parts of my bases, and then he would pick up his commander and send him back. And that was a way of, the tactical nukes are cheaper than strategic nukes, and a strategic nuke defense doesn't pick up on it. And so if you don't have some tactical missile defense there, that nuke will get in and cause you a lot of damage, almost like guerrilla warfare. So that's just how much range the game has.
And speaking of range, this is for many players a positive aspect, but sometimes certain aspects of the game you don't like. I, for example, don't like nukes. I really don't like them. But if you're into them, it's quite okay. But when you're starting a game, a match, you can have a really big influence on that. This is something that I believe only a few games have, that you can say, well, I don't want to see any nukes, or I don't want any artillery, or we only play up to tech level 2. Tech level 3 is forbidden. You can configure this in your match. You can do this right away and say, well, let's not use nukes. You don't have to go into an agreement. You can simply configure the game. There are no nukes available. And of course, automatically the anti-nukes are turned off as well. And you really have a certain control over what is possible in the game, what kind of playstyle you don't want to. For example, I really don't like naval units. I believe they are a little bit overpowered, especially on the higher levels. And I tend to not play with them because I don't like them. I mean, other players may not think in this fashion, think that this is something I love about the game, and you have the option to decide what you want to play with. You are not stuck with a generic situation where you have all the options always in the same fashion. And we already said that something I really find has a nice touch is you can use the CD key to get the game running on Steam. This definitely is something that isn't done a lot and was really a fair move, I believe. When they closed down the GPG network and they were deciding, well, it's okay, you have the CD key, now you can use the Steam version, which eventually led to a new lobby system.
It's also very nice that if you have the original game and the Forged Alliance add-on, you have basically two Steam versions, because it doesn't matter which key you select.
Yeah.
Okay, I covered my entire pro list, or basically you mentioned a lot of it already. Anything from you guys?
I'm fine.
I think that about covers it.
Okay, then let's move on. What are the problems with this game? I think the biggest one for me was always the performance in the end game. It always, it kills the mood sometimes.
Yeah, I concur.
I find that I've had performance issues before, especially if you add AI to the mix, and on the larger maps as well. But I do have noticed a difference. I play a lot of Matchmaker 1v1 at the moment, and you usually play on 5x5 or 10x10 maps, and you don't actually see any of those performance issues, which is nice.
Yeah, it only comes up in the late game and if there is a lot going on. And what I always found interesting is it is not really tied to the map size itself. I mean, in the first 10-15 minutes you will notice nothing. The map size itself is not a problem. But also the number of units itself that are currently present on the map seems not to be the issue. Because if you just wiped out a huge chunk of army from your enemy, or a faction was destroyed and all the units exploded and are gone, the game doesn't seem to recover. I concur, this can really get on your nerves, and it even goes to this situation where the timer on the upper right corner is slower than real time. You can see the seconds ticking, and the seconds are simply slower than in real time, so something is going on. I mean, this might still be something for the good aspect that they did think about multi-core computers or CPUs. So they were actually using multi-core CPU features, but not in a freely scalable variation. The way I understand it, they give certain cores certain tasks, but only up to 3 or 4 cores. So if you have 12 cores or something like that, well, the other 8 are doing nothing basically.
Yeah,
So
and most of the stuff still happens on the main core anyway.
Yeah.
So the stuff that does happen elsewhere is very limited.
And you have to think today this game is really enjoyable, but back then when I were playing this on my second laptop I ever had, we were trying the game and the laptop simply couldn't cope with the situation. I mean, you could play it, but it was a little bit sluggish, and you always have to think in the context of when was this released, and boy, this game really had a drain on system resources. It's very much like with Ashes of the Singularity, a game that really uses your hardware, even maybe not in a most optimized fashion, but then this game needs resources. So I believe at least back then this really was a con that could keep you from playing it, because the game experience might not be as nice as it is today.
Chris Taylor told in an interview that they were so happy that the development time took them a little bit longer, so the current PC builds were better. The original design builds, well, they couldn't handle the game.
Yeah, I mean, imagining all this going on one core, you can forget about it. No way. And, well, let's just say that this is something they could have done better, but at least they were thinking about it. I mean, there are a lot of games from that era that still only used one core at all, so it's better, even though it was not really good eventually, because the game simply uses so much resources. But from another point of view, the decision to remove Annihilator weapons I don't really understand. You know, in Total Annihilation you had those big honking laser guns, very much like the gun of the Monkey Lord, for example. And this is something I find a lack, because I really like those turrets, but it's not really a bad thing, you know. It's more like, why did you have to remove those? I like those. But in general, they were doing 4 factions, and what I find interesting is that they actually do have their own traits. Like, for example, the Cybern are more the sneaky kind of faction, which has cloaking capabilities or radar jamming capabilities. But on the other hand, their units are a little bit less powerful, a little bit more cheap, while the UEF is more like your bring it on type of, with strong units which are more expensive, but then again they are not really sneaky in their ways. But when it comes to the Eon, I really have a hard time to think what is their feature. And when it comes to the Seraphim, they had ideas for those factions, but I believe they could have done them a little bit more distinct. If you play, for example, StarCraft, the Terrans, the Protoss, and the Zerg are really, really distinctive in their ways. They really handle differently, while in Supreme Commander, the general units handle mostly similarly, or the factions handle similarly, and the difference aren't actually that big. This is something I believe they could have done a little bit more intense. Not that the design itself was bad or something, but this is something I believe they could have done better, so to say, giving a more intense variety where it does really depend on how you want to play, which faction you want to use. It's not that much of an issue in this game.
It is worth adding that a lot of the variation comes in with the experimental units. So, for example, if you play Siren, you can have the Monkey Lord, and so you've got the flying experimental. You've got the two different Walker experimental units that really are meant to push forward into a base. But then, if you play as UEF, for example, you have the Fat Boy, which is it's sort of like a mobile forward operating base, and you could argue the Atlantis, which is the experimental submarine, is similar. It has AA, but it's also one of the most powerful naval units. But it really allows you to push forward slowly, whereas the other options allow you to sneak in or to break into a front. So you do get a bit of choice, at least by the experimental stage, between the factions in that sense. That's where a lot of the variation is sort of more obvious, I guess.
Especially looking at the prices. I mean, the Monkey Lord, I believe, is the most cheap experimental unit. And yeah, it's an option to just quickly push out a Monkey Lord and get it going. This is something you will not do with the Fat Boy.
Another thing, which is also, well, they could improve it, let's say that way, the pathfinding. Sometimes I replay currently the campaign, and sometimes it's really off, especially if the units don't drive there where I want them to.
Or also very funny if you produce a unit or produce units in a queue, and they have to go through your base to reach a certain point, and at some point they get stuck and turn around and turn and never getting from this very spot, because the game mechanic itself just gives them an order to do something. Once they do it, they're in the reverse situation where they turn around, and this goes on forever. So yeah.
One other thing worth mentioning on that is you can actually set, with your factory waypoint, you can use the shift key and set multiple, so it won't fix all of those problems, but you could, if your factories were at the back of your base, you could actually have them send the units around your base rather than through it as well. So you do have a few ways of dealing with that. But I do agree that the pathfinding can be one of the most problematic things. Sometimes a lot of people will start building Tech 2 or Tech 3 engineers to just simply have less on the map in their base, whereas it's actually more efficient for Tech 1 engineers. It's just, to avoid pathfinding issues and blockages, you make those compromises.
Yeah. And on a similar note here, as I said, the game really targets big amounts of units, big battles, which in general is cool. But I believe the group behavior still leaves a little bit to be desired, because you can, of course, like in many other games, put your units into control groups and send them somewhere, and they actually do formations, which I find also is a nice feature, but you don't really have a good control of them. If you take your group and send them somewhere, they will at their target form up. But when you send them somewhere and you have units which have different speed, then they will reach in different times. So your entire group is being dragged all over the map if the distance is just great enough. And this I find really bad, because I know the AI has ways of controlling that. If you look at how the AI works, then you will very often see them running around with unit blocks like, let's say, 5 by 15 units or something like that, and they really are able to control this, but I've never really found a way to do it as efficient as the AI does. So this is something they could have done better, the group behavior, or the group concept in general. If you look at Ashes of the Singularity, they have this group aspect, not just as control group, but really as a unit group. And something similar, I believe, is missing in this game. This is something they could have added, so that your unit groups really behave as a group and not a bunch of individual units which form up when they reach their destination.
Also, what really drives me crazy is when I have in my group, for example, anti-air units, and I want to attack the base, a building, a unit, whatever, they stop.
Yeah.
Because the anti-air can't target the building, so...
Exactly.
No, I don't go there.
I won't do anything. I won't even follow my guys. I will just stand around and look good here. That's what I mean. You don't have a group that behaves as a group. You have still a lot of individual units. If you're targeting a ground unit, well, your anti-air doesn't care. That's what it does. It's anti-air.
But maybe I need you as target practice for the turret.
Or maybe as cover for those bombers which are flying around in the space. Yeah, stuff like that. This is what I mean if the groups really behaved like groups. this would really add on top on the gameplay, and maybe this is something they were thinking about doing and didn't have the time or something like it. But this, I believe, is one of the aspects of the strategic gameplay that is missing, I believe. And I still don't know how the AI manages it, if it just places a whole lot of rally points or something like that. I'm not sure.
Okay, guys, do you have any more problems?
Maybe one, but this is kind of a problem with the game. There, of course, it was a shitty decision to close down the network, the GPG network, but, well, that's just the way it is. And what I find problematic is that the DVD and the Steam version aren't really compatible at all. So they lost backward compatibility, and if you're playing with the DVD version and a friend of you has the Steam version, even on the LAN network, it won't fly,
Yeah, it's the same with the GOG version.
Yeah, and this is something I find sad, because it kind of breaks the community into parts, so to say. It may not be as important today, because I believe most guys will just take the Steam version, be happy with it. Not at last because there's FAF, of course. This is one of the really good reasons to get the Steam version.
I think there was a patch on the Steam version as well that was unique, not only to cover that multiplayer stuff off, but a few other things. So I think that probably affected things as well, maybe.
It's just a little bit problematic if you have a friend who says, well, I got the DVD version, let's play a match, and it won't fly. Plain and simple. And this I find a little bit sad, but well, for the most part, those are the bad things, it's mostly minor stuff.
Okay, then I will close this subject off with my last point, the learning curve and the tutorial of the game. I think they could have really done a better job in explaining the more complex details of this game to new players.
Or give you an idea what is going on. I mean, you will notice, as we discussed, that certain things in your economy will tend to rack it down. But for a novice player, it's difficult to find out what to do better or how to avoid this in the first place.
One of the things that we do at FAF is we have a Discord channel where people volunteer their time, and they will actually review your replays for you, and they'll even coach you on how to play and what areas of the game you need improvement on. And so whilst it's not native to the game or the client, that is something that, if we look back at the community, is one of the really good things. They will actually watch your replays and show you what happened, why you lost in a certain way, and really help each other out. So that's just, going back to one of the best things about the community. Everyone wants to help people, and if you have a question about it, where you went wrong, someone will actually help you.
Going shortly back to the pros, this is one of the best parts, of course, in this game, the big community. And as you just mentioned, the willingness of helping new players. Okay, then let's talk very quickly about unique things in this game. We mentioned, of course, a lot like the multi-processing, the multi-monitoring system. I think those two were, the first kind in a gaming at least. Is there any game before it?
I can't say about multi-core, but multi-screen could very well be the first game that actually does it. I mean, still today there are only a few games, It's not very common.
I didn't check completely, but I found on the internet the comment that it supported the first time dual and quad-core processors, so maybe?
Possible.
We've spoken on the unique features. We've already sort of touched on a lot of them, like, for example, the economy. Whilst, yes, it was in TA, it's unique to this line of games. We have already spoken about the strategic zoom. The other stuff that I had on my list to talk about was transports, and then Intel, and we discussed Intel, multi-monitors, and the only thing we haven't discussed on my list was probably Reclaim.
Oh yeah. Also a TA feature, but heavily used here. Heavily.
Yeah, that's my next also. I just wanted to mention that. Chris Taylor wanted to have also the war feeling, that an army would use the material lying on the ground to fuel basically the combat further ahead.
Which is really funny, because you can self-destruct your units, not just for getting away from your supply cap. I mean, I met a lot of games where you think, well, what do I what will I do with those lousy Tech 1 units now? They are just keeping me from producing more. But you can kill them. But there's another aspect to that. Exactly what you just said. It's a tip I read somewhere, and you think, well, it makes sense. You can destroy your unit when you are sure the enemy will tear it down anyways, but you won't leave a wreck. So there's also a tactical aspect about suiciding a unit. It makes sense in certain situations where you say, well, you won't get the metal here, guy. Forget it. Not from my units.
You don't get my commander.
Or your experimental. This is always nuts, because if you send an experimental unit to your opponent's base and it gets torn down too early, so you don't do any damage, it even adds on top, because, well, now he has a big chunk of metal near his base. He just has to reclaim it. Even failure can be a strategic aspect. Not just for the obvious reasons, but the fact that you leave your metal behind.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you crash that big UFO in the middle of someone's base, yes, you've done a lot of damage, but they can pay to rebuild their base with a lot of that by just reclaiming that wreck. The start of some maps also, for example, Seaton's Clutch, it has a lot of wreckage in the middle, so it tends to lure commanders in to fight in the middle at the start of the match to determine who gets that reclaim, because there's a couple of thousand in there. And other maps have various amount of wreckage built into the map, or civilian buildings that you can reclaim and then use those as well. So that can give you the edge if you have the identical play style, but one sent some engineers out to collect some of these big wreckage items. You could have a number of extra tanks over your opponent.
Or on top of that, some maps actually do have neutral energy generators somewhere, and this can really give you a huge boost if your opponent fails to notice that you are hacking. This is something we haven't talked about at all, hacking. If you're hacking the neutral, let's say Tech 2 energy generator, those are, I believe, a 500 per second energy boost that you don't have to invest any resources at all. And if your opponent doesn't recognize what you're doing there, then you all of a sudden you have a new energy generator for free, basically. Yeah, the two aspects that we missed, the neutral factions, because, as I said, you can configure your multiplayer game, and you can even configure the neutral units on maps. You can have them being really neutral, doing nothing, but you can also have them, well, fight against you. So there isn't just your usual opponent, but also neutral faction that will kick your pants if you're close in on their position. This is also something I have never seen in other games in this fashion, that you say, well, those are really guns and they will shoot at you, although they are not really part of the match. And of course, the hacking. This is something we haven't talked about at all. This is something that was really new. I believe TA couldn't do this, or at least I'm not sure. Maybe they did. But hacking a building or a unit where you can take over your opponent's units. This is especially funny if you manage to capture one of their constructors. All of a sudden you have tech from the other guy as well. You can build their factories, their units, their special units, have their abilities as well. This also adds complexity. I mean, there are games like Star Trek Armada where you could do this as well, but it's not very common that you can, by game mechanic, obviously intended, take over another faction's abilities altogether. And, well, returning to the reclaim, this is something especially AI does. You might think that your constructors are completely vulnerable, cannot do anything. That's not quite true. They can hack units, but also they can reclaim enemy units. This is something the AI loves to do with you. If you close in with, let's say, a scout unit and you get too close to their constructor, it will simply reclaim your unit. This is, I believe, also a unique aspect, that you can use a constructor and use its economy features to do damage in multiple ways.
Okay. Any other unique features from you guys?
Not for unique features, but I would like to mention, because we did mention AI before, there was recently an AI tournament which put the AI against a whole bunch of players, but also against each other to work out which was the most complicated, most advanced of the custom-built AIs for the game. So it's worth mentioning that if someone wants to play against AI, if you're playing against adaptive AI, it gets too easy once you work out the game. So someone's created RNG AI, which won the tournament, and it's worth downloading if you like the AI because it can actually compete without cheating. So that's could be useful to someone listening.
Oh, and also interesting, now that you're mentioning it, you could also watch the AI. You don't have to participate in the match. There are a lot of games out there where you can, of course, add an AI player, but usually you cannot sit back and only watch the AI fight it out. You can place on a 4 players map 4 AIs and watch them beat each other. This is also something I find interesting. And of course, you can find out which one is stronger this way, but the possibility to have the computer fight itself without having to do anything. This is also not very common, I believe.
Well, one of the other things, it's not exactly a unique feature, but one thing that happens in like 4x4 games, you'll have an air player and then you'll have other players focused on certain things. You'll have Navy and then you'll have someone on land to take the middle, and then you might have someone on air to deal with those air things so that you can focus those things. And it's not exactly unique, but I think it's an interesting way of, differentiating from a 1v1 versus a 4v4 where you can change your play style entirely. You may only want to play Navy, and that will give you the opportunity to do so, but you may also only want to play air, and you can do that as well. So that's probably an interesting point.
And especially considering that you have an easier time to upgrade. If you have to maintain, let's say, air, naval, and ground units at the same time, because you know your opponent can come with all of them, you will probably don't have the resources to tier up as fast. But if you know you can completely concentrate on, let's say, air units, well, you can upgrade them rather fast in comparison. So all of a sudden there are earlier Tech 2 and Tech 3 air units you have to think about.
Moving on to what could a sequel do better? I think we mentioned a lot of the improvements already in our video for Ashes of the Singularity.
Yeah.
For me, I look at, say, the current sequel, Supreme Commander 2, and say, here's what, you don't do. And honestly, for me, I think before a sequel, I would like to see, I think it'd be fantastic for a remastering of the game before a sequel took place.
Oh yeah.
Simply because we've got something that people value, it works. Often when you build something new, as in the case of Supreme Commander, it has less players than this game. So I think that if this was remastered first, with native, 4K support and new textures, but otherwise being a similar game, fixing some of the bugs. There's a sound bug that affects some people with Realtek cards. Fixing those things, adding maybe more advanced sound support for surround sound to work better and things like that. I really think the game is good enough to warrant a remaster, and there's a lot of work that can be done to make quite a good, impressive game. And the other thing is maybe the AI could be updated with one of the community ones, or remade from a developer, but also splitting out more of the tasks over to more of the cores to make the game run better for more modern processors that do have 6, 8, 12 core stuff.
Yeah, this would be one of the most important features for me personally. I would also say an upgrade to textures and maybe polygon numbers or something like that. But as we said, the optics is still okay. But of course, a facelift would help the game. But the really most problematic aspect really is the performance of the game, considering how much power your current CPU actually has, and the game doesn't really touch all of it. This would be, in my personal opinion, the biggest improvement if they ever decided to do a remastered version. Hands down, I would buy the stuff, no question. The game really would deserve it, I believe. I mean, the fact that it is still so popular tells you a lot, and if they were doing it, I bet they would tear this from their hands. They would really grab it and make a run for it. I need this game. And yeah, I'd be really happy with a remastered version, actually. As you said, there isn't a whole lot you have to do here. Some minor features, maybe learn a few things from more modern titles like Ashes or something.
I think it would be valuable if it were to be remade, if they did sort of what EA did with Command and Conquer remade. They had like a community panel that were involved to give their opinions on how it went, and what features and so on and so forth, so that it could avoid some of those problems where the games get remade. If you look at Warcraft, for example, and there's quite a bit of a negative backlash. We didn't see that with Command and Conquer because they brought the community in from the start. That would be useful as well.
most definitely.
I think this is also a very important fact that the companies have really to learn to work with the community. They have really to ask a question, how do you want a remake? Not, oh, we improved the graphics and include loot boxes, haha.
Yeah, now give me $40 for this because you have new graphics. Wouldn't fly with me, plain and simple.
And Fury, I think you mentioned something in the beginning, like that Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander are so similar that you nearly look at them as one, or as an alpha beta version of Supreme Commander.
Yeah.
And I think you can say the same to Supreme Commander in the potential remake or new title. Use the existing titles and improve it. Push the limit again a little bit.
This was something I was getting at.
And keep the old.
Yeah. It's a funny thing because it sounds a little bit cheesy, but I played them all, I played Total Annihilation, I played Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, Supreme Commander 2, I played Balanced Annihilation, I play Beyond All Reason right now, and I played Ashes, and all those games are siblings, so to say, and you can see where certain improvements came into place, what the idea behind them was and where they are coming from, stuff like that. And if you look at Planetary Annihilation, it goes a little bit different angle. I've also played this one, and all of those games are very similar, but all of them have the same problem. Some things they do better than the others, and some things they do worse than the others. And alone from those few titles I told you right now, you can learn so many things. And if you just take the ideas which are in those games, you could do a new game that would do justice to all of them, I believe. And in a way, it's a cheap way. It's kind of having the parts on your desk and you just have to assemble them. This is why I think it would be actually not too difficult to do a new great title, even if it is not a remastered version. But that would do wonders for this genre kind of RTS. I consider them a subgenre of RTS actually, for the way their economy works.
I just hope that whoever is involved in making either a spiritual successor or anything, it really looks at why Forged Alliance is played and not Supreme Commander 2. Why Forged Alliance is played and not, say, Planetary Annihilation and 0K and all those things. If they really need to know why this one in particular is more popular and a lot of these unique features in it speak to that, and the scale and the dynamic way of playing. So I just hope that the person that takes that on one day knows that.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that this would be the way I would do it too. I would take Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, as you said, look, why are people playing this game? And then kind of steal the ideas from the others where you say, well, this is actually missing. Like, for example, a better group management. This isn't a real game changer in a way, but it would improve the game experience even further.
Yeah, it's quality of life.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably not a lot that you have to do because Supreme Commander has most of the nice features. I mean, as I said, they are like siblings, so you will find a ton of features in the others too. So they are really similar. So the actual changes might not be that much, but you could definitely improve the experience without losing the benefits of the original Supreme Commander Forged Alliance. You could really do this. I'm 100% sure if someone were setting his mind to this and go for it, it would be a really popular title then.
Okay, I would say let's close this video off with the last two subjects. First, what special memories do you have?
I've got one specific one and then one of a more generic one, so I'll start with that. I would say the best thing that I did for improving my skill was to do 1v1 matchmaking and watch those replays, and you can see on a level, just the advanced tactics and choices people make when moving their commander around. You can see the difference that instead of having 4 tanks and 1 mobile AA, if someone has 5 tanks, they may win that battle, and just the little nuances of how that works. If someone has a power stall, just how much it changes the outcome of the game. And if you build too much power, how many fewer tanks do you have? Those sort of things. So that was probably an important part of the game for me. It was playing matchmaker and being able to upskill in that way. The other one, which is a specific memory, was I was playing a 1v1 instead, this time with a friend, and we played for quite a bit of time, and I made a poor choice at the beginning, which resulted in him having naval superiority. And as you were mentioning earlier, once you lose the navy, it's quite heavy. It hits hard, and it's hard to defend. I was building, missile defense. I was building mobile missile launchers to send missiles out to the ships, but eventually I became overwhelmed. But the interesting part about it was I moved my commander up to a second base that I had and built a transport, and then moved my commander to a hidden part on the map up north. And as my base was being peppered with tactical nukes and being finished off, I was building an Atlantis, which is the experimental sub for UAF, which has not only torpedoes, but it also has AA. And then I moved that across the map to start taking out his naval bases to at least prevent him from building new navy. But then he had brought his commander back in the transport, and it flew over this unit, and it shot down the transport as it was flying over it, blowing up his commander, giving me the victory. So that for me was a special memory because it was the most absurd victory you'll ever see.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I have this 1 or 2 times as well, where you think, well, let's transport the guy out of here, and oh crap, that's it. So this I can really feel. This I had this 1 or 2 times as well, where I thought, well, didn't went too well. But my special memory, I believe I already told you, at least the beginning of it. This feeling of having Forged Alliance is the first title of the 2, and playing the first mission and having basically all units at your disposal, ending up with a vast economy, a whole bunch of those, I always forget the name, those Beetle flying units, this tech for gunship of the Cybran, flying around with 30 of them and thinking, well, this is supposed to be a heavy battle, and it's not really getting me sweating, but because, well, I just kind of naturally built the big gun, so to say, and it was the very first mission, the very first Supreme Commander mission I ever played, and yeah, it's going all in, so to say. It was a little bit crazy.
My special memories would be, of course, the epic trench wars you have on the map. Of course, you shouldn't turtle, but you have to fight for every trench basically and go slowly to the enemy base. It's amazing to experience this every time. And the crazy and funny videos on YouTube, for example, somebody built the sign of America, basically the flag, as completely covered from nukes, I mean. So if he fires his nuke, the American sign will fly over Europe and basically destroy Russia.
Yeah, or the not so nice approach with the, fuck you.
Or the crazy bugs they find in the game, which luckily are rare, but they are there, especially with the beaming in. It can be funny. Okay, I would say this is the part of the video where we open the mic to you. Are there any topics, anything we missed, anything you would like to add?
I think I interjected as it went along to cover most of the things that I wanted to talk about. So, if you want to get better at the game, watch your replays, ask for others to watch your replays, and they will help you out in the Discord channel. Play Matchmaker 1v1 and learn to be self-reliant instead of, participating in a team game, for example. Give that a go. I think that's pretty much all I really wanted to say. But the game is, it's extensive and the community is extensive. So if you want to contribute, please do. There's plenty of room for people to do web page stuff. We've got Java developers, Lua, as I said. There's AI development. There's mods. There's maps, etc.
As always, of course, the descriptions include all the links you need. So check it out. It's really worth a look. Okay, I would say that's it for this review. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
So yeah.